to begin with tonight. That's great.
You guys have to quit toying with the tape. All right. All right, here we are in Arnold and Troy once again. And we are on page 162. And now we move to clauses and sentences. So maybe the best thing for us to do is just work through a few paragraphs of this and make sure that we understand it. And then we can zip through some more of it and then apply it in our reading for tonight. So he says, up to now, he's been dealing with, in the very first paragraph on 162, phrases and even words and phrases. Do you remember what the smallest unit of meaning in language is? What do they call that?
Smallest unit of language?
The smallest unit of meaningful meaning, you would say. Or the smallest unit of meaning in language.
The space between words.
No. This actually may go back to your Greek class, actually. Nope. Smaller than a word. Larger than an atom, but smaller than a word. Not an atom with a D, an atom with a T.
Apostrophe?
No, it's called a morpheme.
Is it a morpheme?
A morpheme is the smallest unit of meaning in language. For example, holem vav at the end of the word is a 3ms pronominal suffix. That's a morpheme. A vocabulary word by itself is a morpheme, a form. The endings, blank, ta, t, those are morphemes. They're not whole words, but they give meaning, particular meaning to a word. We don't deal with morphemes in syntax. I mean, we have to deal with morphemes because we have to understand words and parse them and those sorts of things. But syntax is not about the morphemes. Beginning Hebrew is about the morphemes primarily and gets into some syntax. So syntax is about how words operate in their context. What does the word syntax mean anyway? It's briefly. Soon.
Isn't it when you pay money every time you sin?
Yeah, well, if you buy cigarettes.
Cigarettes and beer, that's right.
With subordination or something like that, with arrangement?
Well, soon is with, and the tax part means to be ordered. So
with ordered.
Yeah, so it's to be ordered with. How words relate to other words in the context, you might say in a sentence. Words collect together. The next smallest unit of meaning above a word is a phrase. A phrase does not have within it a real verbal idea, a predicate. So, around the barn, as a prepositional phrase. There's no verbal idea in that, though, is there? You might think of a verbal idea because it implies motion around the barn, but there isn't a stated verbal idea, or even implied. So that's a phrase. So we've talked about phrases. A clause is a group of words with predicate, or with a verbal idea. And that's the next biggest unit of meaning, a clause. The next unit of meaning above that is a sentence. Now, you may have a sentence that is one clause. So there are cases in which a clause and a sentence are the same thing. But sentences can be more than just one clause. So a clause has a verbal idea. A sentence has at least a verbal idea. So a sentence is at least a clause. A sentence can also be, and a clause can have phrases in it. And the phrases can function in different ways. I walked around the barn. Or you could say, that's a simple clause, a simple sentence, but it has a phrase in it. What's the phrase? Around the barn. Or you could use a phrase as the subject of the sentence. For example, to forgive, to err. To err is human, was a clause. So what's the subject of that? An infinitive. Okay. to forgive divine. So you can have an infinitive phrase there, which in both of those. And those are two clauses, independent clauses, right, that are stuck together. To err is human, to forgive divine. Now you could put a period between them and they both stand on their own. But since they're connected, there is another punctuation that you might use to show their connection. What kind of punctuation in English do you use between two independent clauses? Semicolon. Yeah, semicolon. So a clause and a sentence could be the same thing if a sentence is made up of one clause. Or you could have a sentence made up of more than one clause. And we just showed you a sentence made up of two independent clauses, to err is human, to forgive divine. So that would be what kind of sentence? Compound or complex?
Say it again.
To err is human, to forgive divine.
Would you say to forgive is divine? Because to forgive divine by itself,
it implies is, yes.
Is implied.
a compound.
It's compound. That's right. Because the clauses are they're both independent and they're equal. One doesn't subordinate to the other. Now you could have a sentence that's complex, and that means that you have a main clause. I will stop talking when I have finished teaching. So the main clause is, I will stop talking. And then that's qualified by, when I stop teaching. So that's one sentence. It's a complex sentence with two clauses, an independent clause and a subordinate clause. A conditional sentence is an example of a complex sentence. If I finish teaching, I will stop talking. And the main clause is, I will stop talking, and the dependent clause is the if, the process. If I finish teaching. So that's what he's talking about in terms of clauses and things here. So he goes from word to clause, word, phrase, then to clause, then to sentence, and then to the text. What do you leave out?
The book or the collected canon.
Well, no, I mean...
morphine? Is that what you're looking for?
No, well, he leaves out morphine in the beginning, and, you can have the whole body of literature at the end, but there's something in between he leaves out. Something between sentence and the whole text.
Paragraph.
Now, I don't know whether he just leaves that off, or if he's saying that there's not paragraphing in biblical Hebrew. It is called by those, that has a very technical term, the Wycliffe linguists have a very technical term. They call it a chunk. A chunk. Well, there is a chunk of the text that kind of, is my wife's an English teacher, you're an English teacher, right? And you teach kids how to write a paragraph. You have a topic sentence, blah, blah, blah. And I'm not saying that, biblical Hebrew or biblical Greek is written in paragraphs necessarily like we would teach kids to write a paragraph in English, have a topic sentence and a summary sentence and yada yada. But at least the Masoretes must have thought that there were paragraphs in biblical Hebrew because they have those markers for paragraphs in the text. So I'm not really sure why he leaves paragraph out.
He didn't. I would say he doesn't, because at first, so the sentence is comprised of one or more clauses and is the largest grammatical structural unit, except for the discourse, the text. In other words, it would seem that he's specifically saying paragraph wouldn't be it.
Yeah, it does, but that seems to
not be correct.
Not be correct. I would say you could look at a paragraph and say there's structure in the paragraph.
That's why it's a paragraph, because you're breaking up thoughts.
Yeah. So, be interesting to ask him that question. So, all right. So that's a basic introduction to phrases, clauses, those sorts of things. So up till now in syntax, we've been looking at the smaller units. How does this word fit in the sentence? Oh, well, this word is functioning in the accusative case and it's the direct object of the verb. That's a syntax issue. Or, this here's a phrase. Here's a prepositional phrase. And this prepositional phrase is having this function. That's a syntax issue. With smaller units. Now we're talking about clauses and sentences and how those bigger units relate to one another. By the time you get to how sentences relate to one another, and by the time you get to how paragraphs interrelate and those sorts of things, that gets you into the idea of discourse analysis. And maybe he's thinking in those terms. Maybe he's thinking, okay, this is syntax. The other is discourse analysis. I don't know, but he does mention the whole text, so it just seems like he has left out other.
I thought you mentioned that somewhere.
Discourse.
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe by discourse he means paragraphs. It wasn't terribly transparent to me, however. All right, so types of clauses: nominal and verbal clauses. On page 165, we talk about nominal clauses. Biblical Hebrew has the ability to form a clause without the use of a finite verb. The subject of such nominal clauses will be a noun or pronoun. Its predicate will be another noun, pronoun, prepositional phrase, adverb, or infinitive construct. We've said before that sometimes you have to supply a verb of being in Hebrew, just like you do in Greek, and that's what he's talking about right here. Okay, clauses that don't have an expressed verb. It implies a verb of being normally. So you can see these types of clauses where the noun is the predicate. What does predicate refer to?
Completes the subject.
Yeah. Well, the predicate refers to the verb side of the clause or sentence. It refers to that which relates to action or being or whatever verbs do. So sometimes the noun can be the predicate. You, and that's a pronoun, so that's not what we're talking about. You are the man. Now, are has to be supplied. All we have in Hebrew is atah ha'ish. So sometimes you can have. That's an awesome passage right there, by the way. You're the man. But it means it a different way.
Although when I read it, I was thinking, you're the man. I remember that in the Bible. You the man.
You're the man.
That's the message, isn't it?
That's what Nathan says to David when he tells him the story and catches him, on the Bathsheba thing.
I think that's the verse of the day at joelosteen.com.
You are the man.
Take my sheep.
Take the predicate out of it. You the man.
So noun is the predicate. Adjective is the predicate. We are afraid. So that is assigning a quality to the subject. Participle is the predicate, and prepositional phrase as the predicate. All right, so those are noun clauses. Verbal clauses. The subject of a verbal clause will be a noun or pronoun. The predicate will be a finite verb or non-finite verb functioning as a finite verb. Because the verbal clauses are prevalent in biblical Hebrew, and most languages, we offer here a survey of its form. So, the subject of the verbal clause. You may have a noun, that's typical, right? A noun as a subject of a verbal clause. You can have a pronoun as a subject of a verbal clause. You can have an infinitive as the subject, and that's like the one that I read that wrong now. An indefinite subject, anyone. You can also have an infinitive as the subject as well, like to err is human. I'm not sure why I didn't say that, but in any case. All right. Predication of the verbal clause. What does predication mean? As noted, predication in the verbal clause is achieved by the finite verbs. What is predication?
Making something a predicate?
Well, yeah, it's doing the verb thing again. Verbing or verbation or something like that.
Wasn't there a movie called Predator? No, it was Predator.
All right, so word order. Typical word order for a verbal clause in Hebrew is verb, subject, object. And we've seen this from the time we looked at Genesis 1:1. You have in the beginning, but then bara, Elohim, and et Hashemayim later. verb, subject, and object. That's typical. That typical order can be altered for various reasons, and you can see those reasons beginning in 169. For example, the subject can precede the verb to place emphasis on the subject. And you've read this. I mean, we go into this in detail. We'll be here all night and we'll run out of tape. But as we're going through this, if you come to a place where you have questions, stop us and we'll take a look. Okay, so two basic types of clauses, noun clauses, verbal clauses. That is, noun clauses are just clauses that imply the verb instead of actually writing it out. And verbal clauses actually have a verb written out. Okay, subordinate clauses. Now, subordinate clauses, it's tough to say that these are not the little L's that help Santa Claus, but we won't say that. Subordinate clauses are dependent upon and modify an independent or main clause in a combination of two or more predications. Isn't that great? I love the use of the term predication. So you can have a substantival clause. Biblical Hebrew can use either a nominal or verbal clause to serve as a noun substitute in nominative, genitive, or accusative functions. So you can have kind of a clause, basically, functioning in a nominative sense, for example, as subject, in a genitive sense, as a descriptive. In an accusative sense, you can have a whole clause functioning as a direct object. So that is a type of subordinate clause. Now, let's go back to page 171, the second paragraph. In general, there are two types of subordinate clauses. I mean, there are lots of ways you can categorize things, aren't there? Here's one way of categorizing subordinate clauses, and then we're going to go off through these the rest of this part of the chapter and categorize them really in a different way. But, you can put them in two categories: complement and supplement clauses. Complement clauses are subordinate but are closely linked to the main clause and can't be omitted without changing the meaning of the main clause. Supplement clauses, on the other hand, can be omitted without changing the meaning of the main clause. So these substantival clauses are the complement clauses, and so they can't, if you took them out, you'd change the meaning of the sentence. The rest of them are supplement clauses, so you can take them out without changing the meaning of the sentence. I mean, it changes the meaning of the sentence, because I should say it that way. You're not changing the meaning of the main clause. Obviously, you're going to change the meaning of the sentence if you have that. All right, so now we're talking about sentences made up of more than one clause, subordinate clauses. There's a main clause, an independent clause, and a subordinate clause. All right. In conditional clauses, you have a main clause and a subordinate clause. The protasis is the subordinate clause, and the apodosis is the main clause. In other words, the if clause is the subordinate clause, and the main clause is the then clause. If you are hungry, then you should eat. So the main clause is you should eat. The modifying clause is if you are hungry. He talks about various types of conditional sentences, two in particular. Real conditional clauses. If you encounter a man, do not greet him. Well, the likelihood of encountering a man is extremely high, so that's given. You could almost translate that: when you encounter a man, do not greet him. The unreal condition is something that is not true. If we had not delayed, but we did delay, then something. Or if you had let them live, I would not kill you. But you didn't let them live, so I'm going to have to kill you. All right. Final clauses.
Moot point.
That's pretty good.
Moot clause, is that it?
Yeah, it's a moot clause. It's a Chuck Norris thing.
Because moot means to die.
Hebrew humor.
All right. What's a final clause? Well, a final clause is a purpose or result clause. We said that purpose and result are pretty closely related as concepts. Sometimes it's hard to tell if it's purpose or result. Sometimes called telic clauses, from the Greek word teleos. Final clauses express purpose or motivation. Result clauses express the end result, obviously. And then there are negative final clauses. There are temporal clauses. This is kind of interesting to look at. There are temporal clauses that express contemporary action or situation. For example, kasher or ki. You can translate it when something happened. There's later or succeeding situations, and that's introduced by odd, or maybe odd in combination with asher, im, or both asher and im, or ki, odd ki. The idea of succeeding action is also expressed by a vayikto pattern. You see that word on the top of page 177, second line in italics? What is he talking about right there?
Is that a preterite pattern?
Yeah, that's a preterite. It's all the different terms we have for that ball that goes in front of an imperfect. Conversive, whatever. That's what he's talking about right there. All right, then we have a preceding situation. You can see the words achar or acharei, asher, me'az. Right, you might have a causal clause, and these are fairly straightforward, which means are pretty good names for these categories. Subordinate causal clause shows a reason or basis for the action or situation of the main clause. You shall not oppress a stranger, since you know the life of a stranger, since they have experienced being a stranger, in other words.
Stranger, that rhymes with ranger. Stranger, I was thinking, because clause, we've been talking about Santa, and now there's a new movie coming out. Sorry, my mind wandered.
Stranger danger?
Ranger.
Oh, so I'm danger as well.
Yeah, Chuck Norris.
Sure.
It would be really funny if there was a Santa Claus.
In a manger?
In a manger. Yeah, that's right. And then you heard a guitar with the flanger.
Didn't change the station.
All right. This is just a little bit too detailed for us, isn't it? we have to lighten it up a little bit. All right. Comparative clauses. There's subordination, obviously. And we're trying to go with that. So 180 acceptive clauses. Any questions on these things? I mean, we can spend all night going through the details of this. Restrictive clauses, intensive clauses, adversative clauses, circumstantial clauses.
I kind of wish they taught this in high school English, but I didn't get any of this.
You know, you're lucky to get this is the subject of a sentence, this is the verb, this is the direct object in English in public school. Really, because they don't believe in teaching grammar, they believe in just letting people teach creative writing or something. So, this is, probably the fourth grammar lesson you'd get in high school, and then you're not even getting the first grammar lesson.
Well, imagine this being your default learning system, how much better. At 38, I'm like the old dog, no new tricks, but, at 15 and 16, learning the various clauses so that you could write so precisely. Do you teach that?
Well, I'm not teaching this year, but we were, as juniors and seniors, we're supposed to focus more on literature and understanding literature, but it gets to a point where I have to review certain things because they just don't do it. Especially in writing classes. Especially in their writing. It's a lot to go over because they just don't know it.
I would try to substitute teach a fourth grade class, and one of the assignments was to explain what a predicate was. And in my education, I couldn't. And I knew what it. I heard the term over and over and over again, but I couldn't explain it to a fourth grade class. But I thought, hey, at least they're learning it.
From somebody else,
Yeah,
apparently.
but that's a Christian school, though. Yeah, from somebody else. Yeah, that makes a difference, but
If you're teaching and you don't know it, how are they learning it?
That's why I was okay.
Well, we don't teach soccer. You
Yeah.
can teach English.
all right, successive clause. I think reading through this, it's fairly self-explanatory, is it not? Let's look at the last two because those might be a little bit harder. Or under, let's look at the relative clause. You know what a relative clause is? Oftentimes there's actually a relative pronoun in the sentence. The waters which were above the firmament. You can see the asher there is a relative pronoun. Okay. So what kinds of relative pronouns is he going to give us? Very oddly enough, on the top of page 185, A is at the end of the second line.
That is odd.
I'm thinking that's a typo.
Tire the other.
Should we write Arnold or Troy? Which one do you think?
I say write them both because that's significant right there.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so the most frequent indicator of the relative clause is the particle asher. In poetry or in later text, the prefix sheen identifies the relative clause. Within more archaic poetry, the particles zu, zo, ze are used. Occasionally, the attributive use of the participle can also mark a relative clause. All right. B, with certain relative clauses, in particular those pointing to a geographical location, a resumptive pronoun referring to the antecedent of the relative pronoun occurs, but it is best left untranslated. The place which you are standing upon is holy ground. Literally, the place which you are standing upon, it is holy ground.
Or in English, the place upon which you were standing.
Yeah. We had that in the text last week, actually. Remember that? We had a repetition there that was kind of unnecessary in English. All right. Paranomasia. Repetition of a word, both in the main clause and the relative clause, can be used to express a sense of indeterminateness. So, while I go, wherever I will go. So it gives it an indefinite kind of flavor. They went wherever they could go. Which brings me to one of my major pet peeves, when people in English use an indefinite when they should use a definite. Like when someone says, whenever I was 20, okay, just stop and do the math. And then make it when I was 20. Because if you don't
3 times.
Yeah.
Like Nazarene, whenever I was saved.
Yeah.
I was about to say, kind of like college sometimes. Well, my third sophomore year,
Yeah, whenever I was a sophomore. Yeah. All right, and then disjunctive clauses. A subordinate clause represents an idea that is alternative to or stands apart from the idea of the main clause. Typically, the conjunction O denotes the idea of or. Let me know that I may turn to the right or to the left. All right, so those are clauses and subordinate clauses and dependent clauses and independent clauses and those sorts of things. We will do the additional sentence types next time.
Is the final next week?
No, which is a good point for me to want to review the schedule with you, because we do one more shot at finishing the second chapter of Joshua, and then we read in Genesis on top of that, and then the next week the final happens. So when we come to class the next week, we will be having our vocabulary test and our final exam over
translation and syntax and those sorts of things.
So
2 weeks away?
2 weeks away?
Getting awfully close to Thanksgiving. Maybe we should do it after Thanksgiving.
Yeah, probably. Why not? All right, let's just take a break for a second. What we'll do for the final is we'll give you the vocabulary part of the final first. Let you complete that. And when you've completed that, then you may take out your lexicon. For example, BDB or holiday. You can have them both. And take out Arnold and Choi. And I will give you passages from anything that we have read, which means from Ruth, from first 2 chapters of Joshua, the Psalms that we have read. And
We can do Ruth in this class. Does that matter?
Oh, I didn't mean Ruth. I meant Jonah. From Jonah. I scared you there, didn't I? From Jonah, from the first 2 chapters of Joshua, the Psalms we read, and we'll read a passage in Genesis. So you'll need to translate and parse from whatever I give you there. And then I will give you, either from those passages or others, syntactical questions to answer. And you may refer to Arnold and Choi as you do that. And you must finish all of that within a period of 3.5 hours. Cool, huh?
Except for the actually doing it part.
Yes? All right. Let's take a look at...
Can I take a restroom break?
Yeah, oh, sure. Joshua in chapter 2. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe that we are on something in the neighborhood of verse 8, are we not?
Okie doke. Close enough.
All right. So, Cyrus, would you like to tackle, and we say tackle because it is Monday night and the football game is going on. So, would you like to tackle verse 8 for us?
Sure. Now I remember this is a little bit confusing. So if you're watching at home, don't feel bad, you're not the only one. Oh yes. Something of this type here. Before they went up.
What do you think Yishkavun is from?
Oh, Shikav.
Mm-hmm.
So, before they laid down.
Yeah.
Okay. So before they laid down, she went up on the roof.
Yeah, but you left out a word.
Is it with them?
Yeah, you can see that. She went up to them on the roof. All right, how many clauses in that verse? 2. Good guess. How many are independent?
1.
How many are dependent?
1.
What kind of dependent clause do we have here?
What kind of dependent clause do we have? I want to say,
Is it a compliment?
is that what you're?
No, but that's right. But that's not the category matrix I'm looking for.
Sorry, wrong matrix. How can you restate the question in another way that would make it more obvious for me to answer correctly?
Yes, I could. Well, okay, let me ask this question. Which clause is the dependent clause?
I'd say the first one, the preceding.
It says what?
It says before she went, because the second part is
With
independent.
the text, it says what?
Oh yeah, before they lay down.
All right, so what kind of independent or dependent clause is that?
It's the preceding the independent clause. It's preceding
Preceding what?
the dependent or the independent.
Well, yeah, it comes first, but that's not it. So really, you're talking about it comes first in a sentence.
You tell me what you mean.
Well, it does come first in the sentence. Try using the categories Arnold and Troy talks about.
That's what I was talking about, the preceding situation. And the temporal clause.
Okay.
I have it open on the same page.
Why did you say that?
Oh, that's what he was asking. I was looking and it sounded. It makes a lot more sense now.
I'm not sure about that. But anyway. All right. That's verse 9, Cyrus.
Ready for the final?
Do verse 10. Do verse 9 for us, too, Cyrus.
Okay. And she said to the men, I know that God has given to you the land, and that if I remember right, this is we have basically that there is because fall, comes from Nephal, but or just Nephal. Basically, they have fallen I'm really stuck on Aleinu.
Well, that's the easy part.
Thanks. Upon. Is it?
Because you can fall upon something.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just deal with Nafla. Okay, what's it from?
Naphal.
Okay, so parse it.
It looks like a cow.
Okay, a cow, it is. Does it have a preformative?
No.
Does it have a suffix?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the blank ah.
Okay, so what is it?
Cow 3 FS.
Tense?
Cow perfect.
Cal perfect 3 FS from Nafal to fall. So the subject is going to be what?
She or her.
Okay. Something feminine.
Mm-hmm. Oh.
Somebody help me with that?
I recognize the chem, but
What's that?
if I remember right, it's a chem can you. So that'd be what? You can help. Remember, you said go ahead and help.
Well, the chem isn't a verb suffix, it's a...
I know it's not a verb suffix, but
Well, you were...
can. That's those are now.
Mm-hmm. Well,
Oh, I thought you were going through the verb. Because they're similar.
all right. Too late for that now. So, what's that mean? Do we know what the vocabulary means, anybody? Nobody knows that?
We went over at home just a little
Feminine nouns, dread or terror.
That's right.
So your dread or even dread of you. Okay. That's the subject, so go ahead.
Oh, I see. In Einspar, it's a hey instead of a tav.
Yeah, because the ending turns the hey to a tav.
The chem does.
It's kind of like a constructing.
Okay. So that's a 2FS.
What is
The ending. Or 2FP.
2NP.
So I guess I'm confused because I'm thinking of the feminine Naphal.
Well, the noun is feminine, and then it has this masculine suffix on the end. Dread is feminine, but then of you, the you is masculine.
Oh, okay.
And the tav, hey turning to a tav, that's a feminine construct sort of form right there.
That makes sense. Okay, so it would be so basically the terror fell upon you.
No, your terror fell.
Oh, I see. Upon you.
Upon
Us.
us. All right. Keep going.
And that we melted.
Close. Well, what's the subject?
Where says melt.
Yeah, melt's fine, but what's the subject?
sun. Is that
You on the right line?
Yosh
From Yashav. What is Yashav?
to sit or dwell? So, and the dwellers.
Participle, cal, masculine, active, participle, masculine. Plural construct, right? The inhabitants
Of the land.
So, because all the inhabitants of the land melted.
And in front of you?
Yeah, okay. From before you, literally, but in front of you. Melt can mean to be in disarray, so that's kind of the idea. Everybody's just running around, screaming, not knowing what to do. And we have another word for melt later, so there's a synonym. How many clauses in verse 9 then?
2, 3, 4.
Yeah. How many are dependent? How many are independent?
I know there's, let's see, 1 independent, 3 dependent.
Good. This is where math comes in good.
Yeah. I was actually starting to think, can you have more than 1 independent clause in a phrase? And
Does everybody agree with that? 1 independent clause and 3 dependent clauses. Anybody disagree with that? Okay, good, because he's right. All right. The independent clauses, how do they function?
You want the broad, big category, don't you?
Well, think about it. How are they functioning here? What's going on?
They're explaining.
Yeah. All right. So they're explaining dependent clauses.
You want more than that?
Okay. What we're asking is, what is the relationship of these clauses to the independent clause? What's the independent clause?
She said to the man.
Okay, and she said to the man. So there are 3 clauses, all of which she said. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
So, what relationship does that put them into that clause?
Content. Is that one of his categories?
I mean, it is that. Are they not clauses functioning as the direct object of the word said? She said this. And so they are clauses functioning as an accusative, as a direct object. At least that's one way of looking at direct speech in that way. She said, bah, and bah, and bah. Does that make sense to you? Direct object of the verb she said.
Could they be causal? Because the subordinate causal clause shows the reason or basis for the action. No, never mind.
Okay. Kimberly.
Oh, verse 10. This was one of my least favorite.
Was it really?
It's really, really long. I think.
Yeah, this is really long. For we heard that the Lord dried up the waters of A sea of reeds.
So you're one of those liberals, huh?
Why a sea of reeds instead of red?
Yeah. Sea of reeds wasn't very deep.
Oh, well, if that's what Einstein said.
So it was a sea of liberal? Well, it could be the sea of reeds, or there's another option. Yeah.
Mine's probably pagan.
No, he's not. He's a really nice guy. I met him. He's a friend of mine.
You guys are going to pay for that in another life.
Wait, so there's actually two different. They're not two different seas, are they?
Yeah.
Oh. So why did? Because isn't soup? Is that literally?
Well, it could mean red or red.
Oh, it can mean either or. I see.
That doggish in the verb adds an extra E. Red to read.
It's a duplicative doggish.
From before you.
You know, somebody's not going to know you're joking on the tape. Oh, go ahead.
Cyrus has not met Bruce Einstein.
Yeah, told us to Cyrus.
No, I really met him. I have his card and everything. I thought I told you guys that.
Oh yeah, the Grace.
He came down for a Grace Evangelical Society meeting.
You're not kidding, are you?
No. He's a really nice guy, too.
I can't imagine that somebody that can produce such a work and still be alive.
He is.
Or talk to you.
I'm going to...
All right, come on,
I'm going to find his card.
From before you, in your fleeing
I lost my clues.
from Egypt.
Okay. Well, that's an interesting way to translate that, but that works, you know. You went out from Egypt, okay?
And that you did to the two kings of the Amorites.
That looks like from Amar, doesn't it?
Uh-huh. The Amorites who which has to do with location, I think.
Mm-hmm.
From across the Jordan, or
Beyond the Jordan, yeah.
to proper name people,
Yeah.
and to Og, which I forget this vocabulary word.
Well, this is an interesting word, Faram, or Faram. What's it sound like? Heron.
Yeah.
Isn't
That's our ban, but I
it?
haven't.
To ban or destroy.
So would you destroy?
Yeah, whom you destroy, yeah.
Destroy. And I'm trying to think of it as well.
Well, that's just it's redundant in English, but. Bruce Einspar is a pastor? That is so cool.
Mm-hmm. Wouldn't it be really funny if he gives just awful topical messages?
I bet he doesn't. That's cool. Einspar, that's pretty cool. All right, that's very nice, Kimberly. Now, Kim, how many clauses are in there? This is a very complicated. sentence here, very complicated verse.
The first one looks like it's explaining why they've melted in verse 9.
Okay.
Because they've heard of all these things.
So, because we heard is a clause, but that's a subordinate clause, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So that's subordinate to what in verse 9? And she said to the men, yeah. And then that really modifies those 3 subordinate clauses that she says.
Mm-hmm.
So these things are because we heard.
Heard about the Red Sea,
Yeah.
heard about the kings of the Amorites.
But then there are other clauses subordinate to this subordinate clause. Okay? Just like she said, here we have the exact same thing happening because we heard.
Mm-hmm.
And then we even have the definite direct object marker here. 8. What does that hook to? 8 asher. That definite direct object marker is for the whole clause, or even more than one clause. Yes.
So it would be 8 asher, Polish, Yahweh would be one clause, and then 8 Mayan in the Red Sea.
We heard that, and asher would be that, and it's a content marker. We heard that in direct speech.
The Lord dried up.
Okay, the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea from before you, and now here we have an infinitive construct modifying that when you went out from Egypt, Atnak.
So that in itself is another.
Okay, and asher. That's one whole clause right there, right? Can you see it?
Yeah.
And then we start a new dependent clause, dependent on the dependent clause, ki shama anu.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so we have a repetition of asher, and that you did, and what you did to the 2 kings of the Amorites. And then we have asher, which, and now this is a relative pronoun modifying the 2 kings, which are beyond the Jordan. And then, but what you did has several references or really direct objects or indirect objects with Lamed. What you did to the 2 kings, to Sihon, and to Og, whom, now the 2 kings of the Amorites got whom are beyond the Jordan, but that's a relative, that's a relative clause really, but it doesn't have a verb expressed, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's a noun clause. And then to Sihon and Og, who or whom you destroyed them. So those relative clauses that you have, now that's a verb clause, because this is the finite verb there in the relative clause. So do you see how that, now can you think diagramming for a second?
I see that.
Okay, let's see if we can work a diagram here. I'm sure you can use purple for Hebrews, but we'll use black. Alright, are you ready for this? Help me out here. I want you to engage and help me out. Okay, verse 9. She, I'll write it in English because it's quicker, said, and what did she say? How many clauses did she say?
3.
She said, and now we have direct object. She said, the first thing she said, second thing she said, we're going to take time to write it out. First, second, third thing she said to the men. You got to put to the men. She said to the men in there. She said to the men, Three things. How are you going to mark out a direct object? I know, and your dread has fallen upon us, and we've melted. I know you always give me the land. Your dread's fallen upon us, and we have melted. And then all of these things. This gets like a very complicated thing here. All of these things together, because we heard, and then we have how many direct objects of what they heard?
The drying up of the Red Sea. And
All right. Yeah.
And then what they did to the kings.
Okay, so really there's three here too, huh? Okay, so the drying up of the Red Sea, what you did to the kings of the Amorites, what you did to Sihon and Og. 3. And the kings of the Amorites who are beyond the Jordan, and who you destroyed. Actually, you have to say whom you destroyed, and this is, they are beyond. That's not really quite correct, but we're not really so worried about diagramming now. Let's see the relationship of these clauses, okay? So what's the main clause? She said, then what she said, and she said, because we heard, and then these three things, and then there are two relative clauses modifying the two kings and Sihon and Og. So how many clauses do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 clauses. But if all of those are dependent clauses on something, ultimately on she said. That's pretty remarkable, isn't it? Any questions about that?
Let's do Paul next.
Could you do that? Could you diagram a sentence if I asked you to do that?
After translating.
All right. That was a nice job on verse 10 as well. All right. 11, Sean.
And he was heard, and he will hear. And he will hear, and will dissolve your heart. And
Well, wait a minute. You better work on that first word there for a second.
okay, Shema is to hear.
Okay.
And then it's a nifal. It's a nifal. A cow, I should say.
Okay. If it's a nifal,
And it was a nifal is what? So it's passive. It was you were acted upon. It was heard. So like Shema is, and it's 3ms. It's a nifal 3ms.
what? Nifal what? What's nifal what tense?
Cow. Oh, no, perfect. Excuse me. It's a nifal perfect 3ms, but it's got a reversing vav. So
With a patak, not a shalom. So if it's going to be, if it were a nifal, why does it have a vav with a patak and a dagish in the noon? If that were perfect, then that vav would have just a shavah under it.
Oh. And Well, it's not a imperfect CP, right? Because there's no holum. So I must be reading something wrong here. It would take a doggish, but it doesn't take a doggish, that's why. I don't know.
What if you tried a cow preterite 1CS?
Okay.
Sorry, I don't mean 1CS.
I looked at the 1CP.
1CP.
It didn't have the holum, and that's why I didn't go.
Yeah, it's odd because it's a weak verb.
But that's what it's supposed to be then? Okay. So.
Yeah, it's a little bit confusing because of that. You'd think Nick told, right?
Yeah,
But you got the weak verb.
But I looked at I figured, well, with the Shiva, we're looking pretty good either way, but contextually it doesn't work out. Okay.
And it works better contextually, and we heard, right?
So, and we heard, and he, I said dissolved or melted, apparently, his heart, and...
Wait a minute now. New, what is that going to be?
The new. I thought that was, us. He melted.
Okay, now parse via mace, and don't forget to account for the doggish in the main.
Okay. It's going to be the root is main sonic.
Okay.
And so you're losing the sonic. Actually, you're losing the first main, which is why you have a doggish, and the main that remains. And it's a imperfect
Okay, we got a preterite going again, don't we?
right.
And so that explains the patak under the vav and the doggish and the yod.
So
The yod's are performative, isn't it?
Yes.
Main is the first root letter, which an A-class vowel under the first root letter, particularly a patak under the first root letter, is indicative of something. And so is a doggish in the main.
No, contextually, and we heard. No. Mm-mm.
What's the subject of the verb?
Our heart.
That's right.
And melted our heart.
Well, our heart is the subject, so our heart melted.
We heard and our heart melted.
So we never did find out the stem of that verb. Vayamas. So it's a geminate verb. The second and third root letter are the same, so that's dropped off. Patak under the first root letter, doggish in the first root letter means anybody?
Patak in the first?
Okay, now that you should memorize. That you should have memorized. Patak under the first root letter, doggish in the first root letter is what stem? That's very typical of the stem. What if I told you the doggish represents an assimilated nifal? Assimilated noon, I mean. I just gave you nifal.
And you're talking in the imperfect, right?
Preterite, yeah. The imperfect preterite, yeah. So that we should know. That we should know. We should know patak under the first root letter Now it's a weak verb, so you might need to look it up to make sure. But patak under the first root letter and dagish in the first root letter for the assimilated noon, that's nifal. What if it's a comet under the first root letter?
PL.
What are you going to look for? You're going to look for a dagish in the second root letter, which is PL. What if it's an A-class vowel under the performative? Hifil. And you really need to know those three. You need to know those three. You know the cow forms, the cow pattern. You should know patak under the first root letter with the dagish in the first root letter is nifal. Comets under the first root letter with the dagish, if it can happen, in the second root letter is PL. And A-class vowel under the performative is hifil. I mean, you need to know nifal, PL, and hifil in the imperfective. That's not very hard it's hard to keep it straight because it's similar, and in 5 years if you don't review it, you might not remember it. But it's not really that hard to get those three. Right? And the nifal, that assimilated noon, that's a big tip-off right there. And you always know the PL has a dagish in the second root letter. And just remember, hifil has got that A-class vowel under the performative. Okay? So, how you can translate this, our hearts were melted.
Melted it?
Because it's passive, right? Nifal is passive. Or even kind of a reflexive idea, but this is passive. Our hearts melted. What I'm looking for in here is that there's some place where it talks about the redundancy, as we had in the last verse. And you destroyed them. Whom you destroyed them. Right, so there's that redundancy. There's some place in these clauses where it talked about that, but I can't. Information? No, I don't think it was there.
I just wanted to say that.
I did.
You're so
Paranoid.
disinactive.
So we're giving Sean a moment to...
So, do you want me to continue, or am I missing where you want me to do what at this moment?
Yeah, you can either take a look at that verse or...
And we heard, and our hearts melted, and she stood over the wind, or the spirit of the man, in front of them.
Of who?
In front of you.
So start with below and do that translation.
Okay. Start with, what did you say start with? Oh, below. Okay, and she did not stand over the spirit, the breath.
What ruach, spirit, what gender is that?
Ruach? Feminine?
Mm-hmm. So could that explain the feminine form of Kamal?
And he stood over...
The spirit in a man, Kama. What does that mean? Kum, rise up.
Right.
Okay? So the spirit of a man did rise up no longer, Ode, or did no longer rise up now, Mifnekem.
Mifnekem. Well, the name in front of you all.
Yeah, literally from before you.
Which the Lord your God.
Or probably because.
He is Lord in the heavens and He's the Lord before.
He is God.
He is God before the heavens and over all.
Now let's work through this. Because Yahweh, your God, He is God. Now this is a noun clause, isn't it? Right? We're supplying the verb there. He is God. Bashamayim.
In the heavens.
Okay, now, Mima'al.
From
all. Think of all.
Over.
Okay, so in the heavens above.
The heavens above and over the earth from underneath or from below or from under.
Yeah, well, the heaven above and upon the earth
under
below. Heaven above, the earth below. Kind of thing. All right. Now, how many clauses do we have in verse 11? Let's count them. Because we heard. Now here we have a compound clause. We heard, and our hearts melted. So that's really kind of a Hindayatus right there. Well,
and our hearts melted, and
maybe not quite, but we heard our hearts melted.
And this one is really through you. And the spirit of the man did not rise up before you all. That's another one.
Okay, so that's 3.
Which, or that, the Lord, or Yahweh, your God. That's another one.
Because Yahweh, your God, He is God in the heavens above and upon the earth below.
Okay.
So that's another clause. All right, so it seems to me that this, and we heard, is parallel to verse 10, because we heard. Okay, really, this is bringing us up to, and we heard, and what happened. So, basically, this is a repetition of that 1 and 10. So, we heard, and so what do we hear? These things in verse 10. And our heart melted, and the spirit in a man did no longer rise up before you. So those 2 things, what kind of clauses are those?
Okay, and we heard is an independent clause.
Okay, yeah, and I'd say and we heard is just a repetition to bring us back to verse 10 again.
Okay.
Okay, and we heard those things of verse 10, and hearts melting and the spirit not rising. What relation does we hearing have? Do those 2 clauses have to do with we hearing? Anybody?
We heard.
Accusative thing again.
Kind of. Well, that's not what they heard. No, they didn't hear their hearts melt.
It's a result.
It's a result.
So it kind of is repeating verse 9 almost, in a way. Because she said, our hearts melted.
Different word, though. Now, and she said to the men, we know that God gave you the land.
Oh, that's right.
So, again, that the very first and we heard brings us back up to this, because we heard right here. It's kind of repetition of that. And then, so we heard these things, and then what we heard, you might, I don't know, this is kind of wild, the diagram, but you might put this down here like this. We heard, I think that's kind of a repetition to remind us back of that. We heard and the result is 2 things, really, twofold. So we heard hearts melted, and spirit didn't rise up. So you see, we're still going along with subordinate clauses here, all connected together. Okay. Now and these are great exegetical questions, because when you just translate this, do you realize, unless you start asking these questions about these clauses, do you realize how this is all just flowing and connected? In a sense, this is all one big sentence, isn't it? But here's a great question then. When we get to, in verse 11, because Yahweh your God, what is that key? And here's a great exegetical question. What is the key related to? Or what does the key refer back to? What? Because the Lord your God.
She said all this because the Lord your God. That would make sense. That would be correct, wouldn't it? Because she said to the men, because the Lord your God, He is God in the heavens, over the earth below. She's completing her thought.
Well, it seems to me that it's in parallel with the key that begins verse 10. Okay? And she said to him those three things that happened. And why did they happen? Because we heard that these things happened.
So it's a cause?
And, well, maybe it just cascades, because we heard that Yahweh dried up the water, and what happened to the kings and to Sihon and Og, and the result of them hearing those things. Because Yahweh your God, He is God in heaven above and earth below. So what is that because? It could be this, it could be that.
Could we go back up to verse 9?
Well, it could be that their hearts melted and the spirit didn't rise because God, your God, is the God of heaven and earth.
Seems to be the easiest reading, isn't it?
It does.
But just because God is the God of heaven and earth isn't why they melted. It's because God gave them the land and they're coming for it. Right? That's why they're afraid. Not because God is who He is, but because God has given the land that they're on.
Well, it goes back. It's all connected back up to that. But what does this key directly connect to? That's what I'm asking. Because we heard, and because if you can figure that syntactical question out, you probably have something to preach right there, right? Well, all of this in verse 10, in the first part of verse 11, we heard the three things that happened, and the result of that is that their heart melted and the spirit didn't rise up. All of that, another way of saying all of that is because Yahweh your God, He is God in the heavens above and on earth below. So I think what we have is the two keys are parallel because we heard, number one, number two, because See that? Okay. So, all of this is to say that God is really God. The sea, the kings, Sion, and all of this happened with the result that we had this response is a way of fleshing out and saying, God, your God is God of heaven and earth. Does that make sense?
A little bit.
So, she said to them, what were the three, remind me of the three things she said to them. I should have written it up here.
She said, I know the Lord has given you the land,
Okay.
and that the fear of you has fallen upon us. And
Land given, fear, fallen, and what?
in that all the inhabitants of the land melt away before you. So then you get that melt thing. And then she goes on to explain.
Okay, so the land is given. She said, the land is given, fear is fallen upon you, inhabitants melt. That happened because we heard, that happened because. How do they know? Why is the fear fallen? Why do the inhabitants melt? Because of what they heard, and because God is the true God. Does that make sense?
It puts a lot of emphasis then on the we heard, that there must be, the first, because we heard and because God is God.
Yeah, and so she said this to them because they heard and because God is. In a sense.
Okay. It almost seems like verse 9 and 11 are pretty similar. They both talk about the heart melting and the spirits failing. And then I don't know about the spirit of the man failing, but verse 11 just seems to be more specific.
The fear fallen.
Because of the Lord your God. So it almost seems like
The reason the land was given to them by God is because of who God is.
It just seems similar, parallel.
Well, they are somewhat parallel in thought, but remember that's not really the same word for melt there. That's the word for something, for them to be in disarray.
And the word, the Eichbar says war, but Mitchell actually says for Masas is lose courage or dissolve. So heart's lost courage. It's kind of.
Yeah. So it's kind of interesting. It's kind of an interesting and not altogether easy thing to do, but she ends with God is the true God. So how does that relate to what she's saying? And to me, I'm sensing there's something to preach right there, right? If you're preaching this passage, and can you see it?
To me, I see the reaction of the people that realize they are on the wrong side of being God.
Actually, a double whammy.
Nobody likes a double whammy.
The land was given, the fear had fallen, and the evidence felt at first because they heard things of other men, and then they heard because God is who He is. That because of both men and God, they lost a lot.
Well, it seems like all of this tells them.
What's about to happen?
All of this tells them that God is the true God. Or if you could even see this because God is the true God under our hearts melted and our spirit didn't rise up. Because all of this results in this, and all of this leads to, to that, so that causes it. So there are a couple of ways you can look at it that I think make some sense.
1 minute.
All right, well, we're at a moment of changing tape then.
Go ahead and take